Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to just preface this by saying I have the onset of motor neuron disease, so talking is difficult. But that being said, I want to register thanks. The real thanks would take too long. Firstly, Craig, Mareka, and Matthew for sharing their home with me and allowing Ike, my beloved, to care for our cats at her place where I could possibly work. Secondly, to Renelle for all of this and so much more. Thirdly, to the readers, Matilda, Elvie, and thank you for your criticisms, inputs. They've really, really inspired and helped me. Thank you. And for all present, I'm blown away by how many people there are. Thank you for coming. I want to preface the address on the Red Fawn by moving to the trilogy of stories, starting with Tame Dog, which inspired this novel. Tame Dog started with my army career, which I was seconded to the Public Works Department as part of a team of engineers from DHQ. They were building a recce base in the Gqeberha forest. My boss and friend, Stavros Sotiralis, Tarquin to me. Actually, I was Tarquin to him first. He came into the office one morning, called me Tarquin. And this nonsense persisted for the next 2 years. But it was helpful. When we went down on site to Gqeberha, we go to Durban for the weekends, and we go into the clubs with loud music playing, and young debutantes would approach us, and they'd say, what do you mean your name's Tarquin? I thought his name was Tarquin. I said, my name's Tarquin too. That doesn't sound very likely. It's a very unusual name. You say that, but don't you think in this world, many things are just meant to be? What? Doesn't matter. Tequila? Yes. And so it was a tale of two Tarquins. An epoch of inebriation, an epoch of... Yes, God, this stuff writes itself. I just put the Dick in Dickens. Okay. Anyway, just to show, and ladies, this is a measure of my fidelity. Tarquin is still Tarquin on my phone book. He's not Tarquin anymore. No, I built the headquarters for Discovery in Midrand. I'm Steve. So back to the butterfly effect. I was a cheap drunk in the army, and we were living in very privileged circumstances. We lived at home. I lived with my girlfriend, Brenda. And the epoch of inebriation meant a sequence of coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And my secret talent was to be able to work while I was still drunk. So one afternoon, Tarquin says to me, Tarquin, Gqeberha is going into a meeting tomorrow afternoon. I need a concept drawing of a water tower. How long will it take? I said, just a concept, not a design. No, it's just an hour and a half. Fine, do it tomorrow. So I came in the next morning, still drunk. Beautiful, fresh sheet of sepia on the board, fire up the rotorums, clack, 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 0.4 for the borders, and we're off to the races. Now, after about an hour, and I'm afraid this is going to exclude Dr. Mitchell here, because in the context of this, 10 years of medical study is tantamount to cheating. There's a condition that infused my body after about an hour and a half. Maybe you can... Yeah. Is that it? Okay, that was it. So I felt the need for some sanctuary, and the public works department toilet on the first floor was a magnificent facility. I can't speak more highly of it. So I tipped her out of the drawing office, past Tarquin's office, back to the drawing, into the toilet. Inside, smooth, polished cement floors. Doors to the floor, secure, dimly lit. That floor in that cubicle was my secret lover. I'm here for you now, my sweet. Have you been faithful? I don't care. I'm here now. Let me kiss you. What's that scent you're wearing? Don't tell me. It's Harpic with a hint of industrial bleach. And she took me into her arms and we came as one. Now, after a while, indeterminate amount of time, some of the guys from the drawing office came in, Steph, Henk, and I think Peter Steenkamp. And I was lying on the floor and they said, Ed, you in there? Yes. What's wrong? You've had a tummy trouble, Steph. Oh, tummy trouble. We know about tummy trouble. So I was lying, of course, but it would have been nice of him to assume that I wasn't. But I started to manufacture the sounds, I don't know how to put this, of rectal distress. Now, it's important that you take in that, because those of you in this room who are not Hugh Glover, and almost 100% of you are not, what that algorithm suggests is that young males between the ages of 20 and 25, when they're in a small group, get dumber. We do. So I'm entertaining myself and entertaining them. And I like to make people laugh. But more than that, I like to make myself laugh. And I was succeeding on 2 counts. And this was going very well. I was getting more creative. And suddenly I'm playing to a dead room. And Steph says very pointedly, "Good morning, Mr. Knight." Now, Mr. Knight was the head of engineers. It's not that he was a malevolent or dangerous person. He was just all business. He was that kind of guy who at the Christmas party would paint his face like a kitten and curl up on the top of the filing cabinet with a bottle of scotch. He was just all business. He would christen thee, Mr. Knight. And he took 4 purposeful steps across that floor. Squeak, 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 squeak. It was covered 30 meters in 4 strides. Into the cubicle next to me, slammed the door. And that man had a bowel movement. The gravitational waves of which, if you think about it, are now 43 light years from the solar system. He completed his ablutions, left the room. I think a guy in a hazmat suit came in afterwards. And I was contorted into a ball on the floor. I was in a spasm. It was about 36 before I could breathe in. And I laughed for a quarter of an hour. And I thought I'd recovered, and it would start again. And I thought I'd recovered, and it would start again. Eventually, I thought I was losing my mind. I extricated myself from this swamp of mucus, tears, and saliva, sort of cleaned myself up and walked back to the drawing office. Tarquin, I said, "You'll get your fucking drawing, Tarquin." He didn't get his drawing. By 12 o'clock that day, I was out on Brenda's bed, finished. And it's performances like this, Matilda, that I thought drove Brenda from bisexuality to homosexuality. But I've since come to realize that it was I who helped her find her true path in life. And so, after national service like this, I became part of a group which was sent to the border, which was a terrifying experience. Firstly, I was terrified of the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, who had it in their founding document that they wanted me dead. Secondly, the guys I was with, and that was much more terrifying. They were so reckless. They were so poorly trained, with so much NATO standard issue. Yeah, we came under bucket loads of 7.62 long ammunition, which was sprayed out at class standards in Nana. But that experience took me into Ovamboland and places in southern Angola. And on my move back to Cape Town, I met a guy who became the inspiration to Tame Dog, a guy called David Marsden, who's in Red Fawn. He wasn't like the other sort of Grens factors that I knew. He was softly spoken. He was struggling to reintegrate into society. He was not relating to his wife. The only creature he could relate to was his German Shepherd. And he told me about his story, and it stuck with me all these years. And it led me to the conclusion that war is to men as a prism is to white light. Some men are not unaffected, but they put it behind them. They do and see horrible things, and they put it behind them. Some commit suicide. Some perpetrate horrors on other people. And some make careers out of the skill sets they learn. And in Tame Dog, 3 of the males are representative of that. Now, coming to Red Fawn. The story is about the lives of 2 women whose storylines bounce off one another and then reintegrate with cataclysmic events further down the line. Now, the first two chapters are about what made Renata Giannini, and they're not really part of the book, but I've always been interested in what lay behind the student riots in Europe in the middle of last century. It was the Vietnam War, it was the ousting of Mossadegh in Iran, and a horrific genocide sponsored by the West in Indonesia. We didn't know about that. We went to war, we either were for it or against it, we got it passed, and we went on. So Renata Giannini came to South Africa to hide from something. And let's just talk about a few of the themes that are prevalent in Red Fawn. There's 3 love affairs. Brian Waring is a wonderful character. There's a love of a brother who disagrees with everything his sister's done, her choices in life, her opinions on things, and every time she falters, he picks her up. Religion. There are several attitudes to religion, and one person who finds redemption finds God through a fraudulent prophet. The reading will lead into that a bit. Revenge. Colleen must choose between revenge and love. There's also, I think, time to move to the reading. I wonder if I could ask Senora to read for me, just 2 pieces. They're marked here.
What would you like me to read it once I come up here?
Yes, if you would.
Put the microphone on her.
It's fine.
Okay.
I'll just read loudly.
Okay. Read this page,
The whole page.
please. This relates to Beetle. Beetle, who's on his discharge from the army, became an armed robber. He's hiding from the law here.
Okay, it's chapter 14, Sergeant Baikis. Her brothers, wives, Simone and Brenda, had planned to visit Michelle in the late afternoon, and she made it her quest to be friendly and hospitable to her sisters-in-law. Michelle told herself that this was not just self-serving insincerity because of her brother's help, but that she would enjoy some company. Beetle had undertaken to spend the day at the beach. He left at 9 a.m., crossed Beach Road, and made his way through the thick bush, risking contact with the bush dwellers. It was a beautiful hot summer's morning, and all the anxiety was gone. For all that he had been through, he allowed himself this morning of simple joy. He prayed, something he had not done since his childhood. He recited the Lord's Prayer out loud. He gave thanks for their health, shelter, and sustenance. Today there was to be no fear. He felt that with each year that passed, the likelihood of his capture diminished, and he allowed himself to imagine that his file had become buried under a mountain of more pressing cases in the emerging crime wave of the new South Africa socio-political fabric. He stripped down to his shorts and ran towards the Atlantic. Frigid water, chilled by a week-long fresh southeaster, numbed his toes as he kicked at the icy brine. His hands cramped with pain so that he had to make dashed forays into the sea. Withdrawing with this spasm became too intense. He finally dove straight through a breaking wave and shouted animal sounds, quickly withdrawing once again from the salty ice bath. He dragged his feet through the fine, hot, white sand and brushed this off his calves as he left the withdrawing tide.
Thank you, Ovi. And please read.
Now you're pushing it, Ed.
Hey, you're Italiano. That's a...
I can cook, not read.
Oh, see, just that page.
Chapter 30. Death by Misadventure. There, partially buried in the slope, lay right side mirror, as it had for 12 years, of his mother's opal. She picked up the mirror. Had the last face to look into his glass been her mother, with fear of her eyes at the sight of her killer converging on her? Either that, or the glass bore the reflection of a woman who had fallen asleep at the wheel, hit the barrier, and met her own death. Colleen began to doubt. There were too many complications in the plan, such as to witness police reports. Perhaps she would do better to heed her father's advice that the reality of this event was just a tragic car accident, and not try to infuse it with blame and culprits where there were none. The site bore no clues, much less reveal any secrets. There lay scattered shards of glass and a rubber waterproof strip, and Colleen suddenly felt very foolish. The cliff much steeper than she had remembered, and the opal had come to rest. The opal is obviously a vehicle. It's EL. Had come to rest against an outcrop of granite. Had she made this visit to the site of the death of her mother to show herself that there was nothing to learn, that her father was right? Her mother's paranoia had its roots in fear of reprisal or prosecution, which never came, and the conclusion of death by misadventure was the most rational of all. She sat on a rock and looked down over the Constantia Valley, and suddenly a question occurred to her. It was not a voice inside her head, nor a vision, or even a presence of any kind, but a question in Italian manifested within her conscience. Perché sei così arrabbiata, tesoro mio? Question mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Ovi. Okay, I want to end, thank you, presentation by quoting German physicist and mathematician. He said that if forced to choose between truth or beauty, you choose beauty. Thank you. Thank you. Please eat. Thank you.
Questions.
Oh, do you want questions? Oh.
You guys are left, we're going to ask questions.
Yes, if you want, yes.
How long does it take to write books? We've known for...
No. It's hard to say. As I said, the 8 months I spent at Craig and Maracas, this story came very quickly. I don't know why. The Tame Dog has taken much longer. That's because it's the groundwork. And then suddenly, because I had this time at Craig and Maracas, it just popped out. And the sequel popped out. I would say this popped out more holistically, successfully in one go than the sequel did. The sequel has become more successful. So it came very quickly. Yeah.
When were you in the army?
77 and 8. So I was going in for a year, but I'd studied first, and they added the year.
Engineering?
Yeah.
What engineering do you study?
Mechanical.
Mechanical.
But I was with civils. Tarquin's a civil engineer. He came for the 2017 Masters. That's us at Borvatello. He's a good guy, good friend of mine.
And the Duku, which is where?
Duku Forest, it's between Matuba and St. Lucia. There is the recce base was built.
And that's where the set,
Yeah, so we did the design. We went down and plotted out in searing heat the services, and a corporal in a D6 drove all over it the next week, so we had to redo it. But the Holiday Inn in Durban had special for national servicemen, so it was a good gig, you know. The reason I told that story is because it was a national service of privilege and goof off. And
what did you drink there? What
I did. Well, here's the thing.
Ever since I've known you, you've never drank.
No, I was a cheap drunk. 6 beers and I needed a blood transfusion. Brenda could drink 6 beers before she went drinking.
Ever since I've known you.
No, I haven't drunk for 33 years, but in the army, week after week after week, we just went to bed at 3 in the morning. It just became a thing. It was, yeah.
What about the sequel?
Sequel, The Massive Nothing, is Colleen appears in it. It's about an astrophysics lecturer who has an affair with one of her students, and that causes a lot of trouble in her life. She grew up in Humansdorp. I've entered it in a competition in Italy for unpublished work, which will be judged in October. Yeah.
How did you go, after you've written the books,
Yeah.
how did you go about getting to this stage now? Because you've written books.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't. It's hard to say. I didn't do much about them. Matilda Elvie read for me, and from time to time I'd edit. And I'd say, okay, it's fine now. Then I'd edit again. I must have edited these books 15 times. And I found there's no finality to this process. Those who, my beloved is a journalist, she says, it never stops. You just stop at some point. And I saw an opportunity, I submitted it, didn't hear anything, forgot about it. There was a request for a Zoom interview in October last year, and they've been so good with me. Yeah.
As your books.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, drinks. Thank you. Thank you.